Hi everyone, and welcome back to track 2 of the Festival of Damn. We're delighted to see so many of you returning to the platform today. Also returning is our track 2 chair, Jared Gingras. Over to you, Jared.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you all for rejoining us today for another full schedule of the Festival of Damn. I hope you all got a lot of value out of yesterday's sessions, and I am certain that today is going to bring more of the same. So this morning we're kicking off with a really fun session from Amanda Figueroa from Curationist, and you know, in my experience working with the Real Story Group, I've had the opportunity of working with a number of different museums from around the world, including some of the museums that contribute to the Curationist, Amanda. And I'm always encouraged by the people that work at these museums who are so passionate about open standards, right? And you know, when selecting their own digital asset management systems, you know, a key requirement is saying, hey, we need to be able to adhere to this vision that we have of making our collections truly open to the world, right? And not creating these walled gardens that only some people can get access to, but truly making them open. And you know, on that side of the house, I always worry about that being just half the problem, right? The museums themselves, the people who own the collections themselves or manage the collections themselves, you know, have to make their collections open, have to make that commitment, have to adhere to open standards, have to adhere to Creative Commons approach of doing things. But on the other hand, someone needs to consume that and make use of those open collections, right? And so I'm really encouraged to see, to hear from you, Amanda, about the work that you and your colleagues have done at the Curationist to kind of serve that purpose, at least for some museums out there, you know, and start to consolidate some of these collections in a single interface. And so I'm really curious to hear from you, you know, your journey and how you got to where you are today and what you have planned for the future. So thanks so much for sharing, Amanda, and I'm sure everyone's going to learn a lot today. So over to you.
Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. You are completely right. I'm sure you get that all the time. There's a huge tension in in GLAM spaces, gallery, library, archives, and museum settings to find this perfect balance between the sort of curatorial caretaking that it requires to guardian these artifacts, these images, even digitally, and the ability to make things open and usable and shareable to as many people as possible. You know, those things will always seem to be in tension. So I'm really excited to share a little bit about the balance we've struck at Curationist. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Here we go. So good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Figueroa. I am the community director of a wonderful project called Curationist, which I'm so excited to talk to you about today. It's been a joy, certainly, to get to present and talk about this amazing project in so many spaces, including the Festival of DAM, the Festival of Digital Asset Management. And before I dive in too deeply, I really want to make sure that I give so much credit for this presentation and for so much of this work broadly to my colleague Sharon Mizota, who certainly helped me get up to speed on my understanding of metadata and taxonomies and our digital asset management, but does so much important work on the back end and then taxonomic structures we use at Curationist. So I really want to make sure that she's given her flowers up here at the top. So to get started, what is Curationist? Curationist is an open source platform that brings together digitized open access art images from a variety of different institutional partners, museums and archives primarily, into one searchable database. That sounds really simple, and our executive director has called it a magic wand search tool very often. But I am assured in our weekly dev team meetings that it actually took quite a bit of technological know-how, technological problem solving on the back end. Previously, every time a museum, gallery, library, archive would digitize some of their collections, they would also invent their own metadata structure. And they would have their own system for managing these digital assets, organizing them, normalizing them across the whole collection, etc. And while that works really well internally for them, it means that, the Brooklyn Museum and the British Museum might not have the same structure. And so even though they both have digitized their collections, those things aren't searchable, and they aren't searchable in the same place or the same way. They are searchable at the Brooklyn Museum website. You can search the Brooklyn Museum collections, and same for the British Museum and many organizations that have digitized collections broadly. What Curationist does is we pull in all of those digitized images from a variety of different institutional partners. And after we pull them in, we also normalize their metadata structures. So we are leveling the playing field in so many words, so that you can search the Brooklyn Museum collections and the British Museum collections and the Met collections all in one place, and be assured that because of our normalization process, that you'll be able to find things across these different institutions with relative ease. It's a pretty incredible platform. Of course, that brings us to this idea of curation, like I mentioned up top. Part of the reason why these metadata structures at institutions aren't always the same is because each institution takes its own approach towards curatorial work, and they have their own histories of curatorial work. And the fact is that a lot of curatorial work and a lot of museums, I would say most museums, are really grappling, even at the metadata level, with the history of colonization and white supremacy that began museums. The first museum as we know it today was the British Museum, founded in about 1857, I believe, specifically to display the might of the British Empire by exhibiting stolen artifacts from the Middle East, from Asia, etc., from North Africa as well. So even in the level of the metadata, we have so much of the legacy of what museums are and what curatorial work is. So you can see here, we have those lingering legacies in the metadata that we pull in from our institutional partners. That's not always out and out racism, although sometimes we find that in legacies of metadata, but sometimes it's simply the prejudice of not knowing. We have so many artifacts that we pull in digital images of that we don't have complete records of, because complete records were never established after they were taken from their indigenous creators. So we see a lot of that, and in seeing that and noticing that, as we were trying to just simply normalize our metadata fields so that we can search by year or location in a streamlined way, we also realized at Curationist that we had an incredible opportunity with that. We had an opportunity not simply to normalize metadata so that everyone's year field, fits the same data format. We also had the opportunity to add metadata and to use our normalization process as an opportunity to augment these records in so many ways. And I call that curation-ish. Mostly because I think it's really funny, but also because I think it's also very true. It is curatorial work, certainly, to pull in this metadata, and it is absolutely curatorial work to add to it. And so when we add to metadata, we have a team of amazing digital archivists, as well as sort of a Critics of Color program that brings in art critics from underrepresented or more specifically under-resourced backgrounds. And we also have a fellowship program that works with higher education researchers, faculty members, and librarians to incorporate research and information about these objects that isn't in the metadata that we source from institutions. What this means is that not only are we able to make images and artifacts widely available simply by making them more searchable, we're also able to grant knowledge holders access to share information that they have that hasn't yet made it to the institution of record. Through doing this, we're able to put local level knowledge on par with institutional expertise. So when we get a record from the Brooklyn Museum that might say like Ethiopian artifact circa 1800s, we might have a fellow in our fellowship program who can say, actually, I know that this is specifically circa 1850. And suddenly we have more information. Suddenly we can add that to our metadata, not changing anything that we received from Brooklyn Museum, for example, but we can add that metadata that makes it even more findable and even more specific in our database than it necessarily might be in the institutional home. This means that we also can work with grassroots level cultural heritage knowledge keepers to incorporate their awareness and metadata and information that's important to them. A huge example of this is our work with a project called Local Contexts, which adds traditional knowledge notices to artifacts that were created with traditional knowledge from Indigenous groups, and also provides information and context on how that image can and should be used, and specifically what Indigenous community it comes from. This is all additional metadata that we pull in from these sources, our archivist team, our fellows, our critics of color, and our community partners, to add to the metadata records that we're already getting from our partner institutions. From there, we're hoping to be able to expand and continue to do even more with this metadata, being able to push it back perhaps to our home institutions. One example of that is one of our staff members here at Curationist actually noticed a mistranslation of an African word in I think it actually was the Brooklyn Museum metadata, and we saw it. He let us know, and we actually went back to them and said like, hey, you might want to just adjust this. And I believe they did, which is, a perfect miniature example of what this project can do. We're also exploring ways to push this knowledge into other data aggregate open source places like Wikimedia and Wiki Commons, so that those records also get updated with the knowledge that we're making room for here at Curationist. So that's us. Like I said, we have ended up now, after realizing the power of this normalization process, with what my colleague Sharon describes as 3 layers of metadata. The metadata we get from our institutional partners, the metadata that they have in their system. Then we have the layer of metadata as it is normalized by our system, making fields match and making data normalized and in the same format across all records. And then we're also at this place to be able to augment that metadata even further with the information from our archivists, critics, and other cultural experts. And please keep in mind that when we add metadata from these people who don't otherwise necessarily have access to be experts at places like these large institutions that already have their curatorial teams set, it's placed on par with that metadata as well. So everything becomes democratized in that way. You can search and find results that were verified by curators at these large institutions, and you'll find metadata that was sourced directly from Indigenous communities all around the world. And all of that feeds into the broader mission of Curationist, which I describe as good citizenship at scale. This is about finding ways to share widely grassroots level cultural heritage work, and bring that in and match that with the very vital work being done at these large art historical institutions, all to benefit open access art, education, and digital sovereignty. And because this is an open access everything, all the images you see in my presentation today are in our database. You can go search for them, and you can go find many, many more beautiful things. Especially if you come and check it out at the end of this month, we'll be launching our V2 platform. which is a brand new refresh, and we'll have, I believe, over 4 million different searchable artifacts in the database. So please stay tuned. There's so much more to come from us, and I'm so thrilled to let you know about it.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And we have some time for some questions, so that's good. And I'll just remind everyone, if you have some questions, just put it in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to those. But Amanda, I wanted to start with a few questions, if you don't mind. I'm curious about how much back and forth you have with the contributing museums themselves, right? So you know, how much dialogue are you having with curationists, you know, on the other side of the fence, if you will, you know, who are supplying their content to you, and you're consuming it, and you know, is there a back and forth there?
There is some back and forth. Yeah, I often get asked if institutions or curators in particular feel you know, infringed upon maybe, or taken aback by the metadata work that we're doing. And it's always my deepest joy to say no, they're really excited. They get really excited about the additions that we're able to make. We do source most of our collections from open access APIs and other pull-ins that these institutions do make publicly available. Everything you'll see at Curationist and everything we pull in has some of the freest Creative Commons licensing, which is why we're able to do that. But we do get in touch occasionally with these partner institutions, especially, first of all, to let them know what we're doing, and get to share our work, but also we get in touch sometimes to make sure that the things are working. Sometimes we'll notice that, you know, recently the Walters Art Museum made a small change to their API, and we had to go back to them and be like, wait, actually, can you do it like this? And it got to be a really collaborative moment as we're all working towards this this open access art, images that are shareable and usable as widely as possible.
Oh, cool. Jamie has a question around do the museums that contribute their content to you see an uptick in usage in their content since contributing? And you know, do you send metrics back to them to kind of show, hey, this is working, people are viewing this?
That's a really great question, and that's something we're definitely measuring moving forward. It's hard for us to know if these home institutions are actually seeing an uptake in their collection. So it's something that we're in conversations about learning to track even more in depth. I will say right now we're actually we're just getting ready to launch, so I can't share any preliminary findings with you, but hopefully, gosh, by this time next year we'll be a year into the full launch, and ideally, yes, ideally I'll be able to say, yeah, the Brooklyn Museum visitation rates went way up.
Yeah, I imagine that's a compelling story to the next museum, right? You know, if you're able to show those stats, you know, I think you'll be able to. It's already a good story, but you know, certainly having that proof is huge.
I love numbers.
Yep. And you know, that's so funny, and this is not just for the glam space, but it's this kind of Uber trend that I've been watching, you know, as it relates to the industry as a whole. You know, I think if anything, you know, we'd all kind of say we're all content people at heart, right? You know, in the DAM world, but we have to embrace the number side as well, the data side, and I think the data and content continue to get closer and closer and closer, and so I think we have to open ourselves up a little bit and not wall ourselves off and say, oh, the data is not my problem. You know, I'm just a content person. So I think the fact that you said I love numbers is something that we can all take from that, and because as content people, we need to marry up the numbers as well.
Absolutely. I got all the way through graduate school saying, oh, I just like books. I only care about books and feelings. And nope, turns out I love numbers too.
Awesome. Another question from the audience. So what are the biggest challenges you face when trying to normalize the different organizations' metadata schemas? Right, because everyone's got their own thing, and you need to make sense of it when you're kind of displaying it in a common way. So, what are the big challenges there, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. So, thankfully, a lot of our partners, you know, because we are specifically targeting a very specific type of not just museum in general, but also art museum. the normalization process hasn't been easy, but it has been possible. I will say now that that a lot of fields, you can expect to be pretty easily mappable, like country of origin or date or things like that. And now that we've gotten a lot of those settled, what we're really turning our attention to is multi-language support. We have, images of artifacts from all around the world in this database, which is such a joy and such a blessing. But a lot of just simply when it comes down to, non-Latin characters can be really hard to normalize. Consistent translations from different organizations who have different translators, it can be really difficult to normalize. But it's a goal of mine, certainly, to be able to at least say that every artifact can be, displayed, rendered on our site, both in English and in the language of the culture that made it. That just seems like a great place to begin. Although I'm constantly being made aware that it's a very challenging thing. But yeah, multi-language support is at the front of my mind again as we prepare to launch and start thinking about features to come.
That's amazing, and I imagine that that's just a translation and is always a massive challenge, right? Because there's the things that you mentioned, making sure you can support the characters, just for things like metadata across the different languages. But then there's also the interface itself, right? And supporting, that experience. And then as you continue to grow, expanding the back end experience, the platform experience, as you have more staff members that might be across the world, doing curation of their own. So it's such a multi-layered, thing that needs to be considered, and it's never easy. So I wish you luck on that. But
especially as we want to be able to pull in digitized collections from institutions world over. Right now, most of our partner institutions might not be English, English facing, but certainly have English language support in their databases. But we have an eye towards a lot of collections that that have just originated in completely different languages. So that's going to be another big challenge for our dev team and our amazing team of digital archivists.
Yeah, no doubt. Another question, this one's from Lisa, and Lisa says that she loves that this highlights that good metadata requires work. And so she is wondering, though, do you at Curationist, do you work with various committees out there, in the GLAM world to kind of try to elevate and improve the existing standards as they, there are a bunch of standards out there, but they can always be better, right? So are you working with those bodies to kind of improve everyone's standards capabilities?
Yeah, I consider this a major component of what we do at Curationist. Is not simply just to build our own thing. It's not simply to enter the world and say, look, we did this for you, but also to really participate and elevate the field of open access broadly, whether it's specific to us and our platform or not. So we've been really lucky to have great collaborative partnerships with organizations, like I mentioned, Local Contexts, who has been an absolute joy to work with as they push to get traditional knowledge notices as standard metadata. But also Creative Commons has been an incredible partner to us as we think about licensing and what that might mean for metadata records. And also the Wikidata, Wikicommons community, which themselves have their own metadata structure as well. So yeah, truly thinking about how we can push everyone in the field further, and not simply, I keep saying, I don't want to throw a party for myself. I want to go have fun with my friends. I don't want to throw a party by myself.
Awesome. So next question's around what recommendations would you make to other museums out there to make their open access metadata and images more useful to users and platforms like Curationist? What can that side of the house, what can they be doing to make themselves better ready for you?
Sure. So we're actually, again, in the middle of thinking about a couple of projects to develop perhaps a toolkit or some other resources for institutions that are beginning their process. And of course, offering help, resources, time, however we can. I would say one of the biggest things, first of all, is simply to digitize. that's a huge undertaking before you even get to the point of considering, what's my metadata, what license does this need to fall under? Just the intense labor, resources, funding it takes to be able to digitize a collection is a huge obstacle that's very much on my mind. If institutions have the resources for it, please, please, please do it. And then please help your smaller local archives, organizations, cultural heritage missions do the same. After that, I would say the second best thing is to make your digitized images as freely accessible as possible. A CC BY license is our baseline. If it's not that or even freer, it's hard for us to work with those images. We are exploring ways to consider working with images that for many good reasons might need a more restrictive license. Again, I'm thinking a lot about some indigenous artifacts that that the cultures that created them have specifically asked, please don't share this beyond certain points. So we're looking into ways to be able to work with those types of restrictions as well. But right now, having something as freely accessible as possible really really does a lot of help for us.
I'd also imagine I'm representing the technology analyst in the room, so I'm thinking about situations that I've walked into in the past with working with GLAM organizations, and even those really well-intentioned organizations that went through a digitization process in the past, they might have, for a variety of reasons, got stuck with a digital asset management system that maybe isn't so modern, let's call it, right? and it's what I find is it's even if they put a lot of work into getting the metadata right and whatnot, but getting it out of that system and making it freely available to modern APIs, it's a struggle. So as with anything, you need the right metadata. You need to have gone through the effort to digitize, but you also need the right modern technology to be able to communicate to all these other systems as well. So I'll add that to the list.
Definitely,
as well.
Thank you.
So I know the plan is to make this platform continue to grow over time, right? You want to bring on as much content and assets as possible. So I'm curious, what's the recruitment process like? How are you getting the word out? I mean, imagine just doing sessions like this is a great step in the right direction, but what's the tactical plan to reach other big and little museums and everyone in between?
Sure. So like I said, we're doing our launch the first week in December. If you're interested in seeing us throw a party for ourselves, I'm just kidding. If you're interested in following along with the launch, please go to our website and sign up for the newsletter so you can stay in touch. And after that does launch, we are looking towards, accessioning new collections over the next year or so. And part of what that looks like is, a lot of public work like this, a lot of presentations and events and collaborations. But a big part of it, I'm realizing is having to do a lot of outreach ourselves. It's great to plant our flag and put up our open sign, hang our little shingle and say, okay, we're ready. If you've got digital assets, we want them. But there are so many arts and culture organizations that just can't prioritize digitization. They have missions that would certainly benefit from this digital access, but they just don't have capacity or resources. So a huge focus of mine in the coming year is going to actually be doing that recruitment ourselves, finding organizations that have key collections that are not yet represented in what we have. And then reaching out not only to say hey, have you thought about digitizing? Because we could use your collections, but also to ask, what do you need to make that happen? How can I help facilitate that for you? Does that look like, we partner together on a grant and Curationist is a key supporter of you through that process? Does that mean that we help make connections to a digital archivist team that can help you, a consulting team that can help you, support from Wiki Commons or other, peer organizations in our network? So I don't want to call it handholding because it's not. But again, it's part of that good citizenship at scale. It's about saying, we know this is important, but we also know that this might not be the most important thing to an organization that's, just trying to keep the lights on, or an organization that's like, we want to focus on in-person work and in-person visitor experiences. So taking some of that labor off of these cultural heritage institutions is not just a good recruitment policy. It just makes me feel like a good person in the world. It's just a mission that I feel really strongly about.
I think that's great. And I was wondering, could you expand a little bit on kind of the structure of resources that Curationist provides? Like, what does the team make up? What are the skill sets that that your team possesses? And I think I have an idea where you might go with that, but I'm curious, like how how blended is the team? Is it a very much a cultural heritage background, or is it very much a librarian background? Is it very much is there a technical slant, or is it a little bit of everything? So give us a sense of what's the makeup of the team.
I'm super blessed to say it is a little bit of everything. We do, I would say, as an organization as a whole, we probably veer a little bit more onto the technical side of things. But like I said, my background is all books and feelings, anthropology, art history. And we have a lot of people on our team who, more than just being art historians or cultural heritage workers, really have a lot of experience specifically in community engagement and public programming work. So people who are used to going out, meeting people face to face, and trying to find that common ground of like, here's what I can offer, here's what I think you might need. Let's both adjust and see what we can build together. And I think that's really the heart of why Curationist has been so successful so far, and why we're talking about things like not simply partnering with big organizations who already have their digital collections and their APIs ready to go, but thinking about, who's not here and how can we help them. That being said, we do also have a truly global scale just in our staff. We have team members in Ghana and Chile and Canada. I split my time between Brooklyn and El Paso, Texas, which is my hometown. So we really are all over, all time zones, which can be a little challenging when we have to do our all staff meetings. But a huge asset when it means that we get to have a presence at conferences and organizations that are local all around the globe.
Great. And a follow-up question that came in from the audience to this question is can you give us a sense of how big is the team at Curationist?
We're little.
Small but mighty, as we say.
I know.
Right?
I like to call us scrappy. Gosh, I think probably we do work with a lot of consultants, thankfully, and a lot of people who jump on to do project focused work, dive deep for us, and then we get to sort of evaluate from there. I would say, I believe overall we're probably less than 40. That's not necessarily including everyone who has ever come on as a content writer or a critic or a fellow, but I would say, the people who have long-term remained engaged with the project, I would say definitely less than 40. And of course, we love to move in our critics and our fellows again and again and again. So we keep a close circle, which I think is to our benefit as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet a lot of the museum folks on the call today are saying, well, you're not that small. If you're 40 people, I bet they would love that. Yeah. Great. And then the second half of that person's question was, I know your launch is coming up, and the question was, and you might have mentioned this, but I might have missed it. Like, exactly. So how long was the journey from the beginning to the launch? How long did all this take?
Sure. So Curationist has been operating for a couple years now. I personally came in February, March of this year, mostly because they did recognize, we've finished our beta stage. We are ready to launch something that feels good, although not done. This is going to be a perpetually iterative process. So I've been on for less than a year now, just sort of gearing up for this big event. But I would say, it's been a very short time overall.
Great. And one last really quick question, we have just a minute left, but the question was, how do you handle the sensitive material in the dam? And the example that was given was like something like the Confederate flag might come through, and how do you handle stuff like that? I know you kind of touched on a little bit of the sensitive side of material in your slides, but what is the practical steps that happen when something like that comes through?
This is something that's handled pretty specifically by our digital archivist team. We're very lucky. Again, my amazing colleague Sharon Mazzotta, who I'm so sad couldn't be co-presenting with me today. She has not just a background in metadata and taxonomies, but specifically in DEIA metadata. So she has not only the technological know-how, but also the sensitivity training and the awareness of broader cultural conversations to make sure that sensitive information either does get tagged appropriately in the database, but also gets flagged for broader conversations with grassroots level communities that need to have a more present voice in our conversations about those objects.
Yep. Awesome. Amanda, thank you so much. This was excellent, and thank you to everyone for all those really great questions. I encourage you, if you have further questions, to contact Amanda directly. I'm sure she'd love to continue the conversation. And with that, I'll say, hope you enjoy the rest of day 2 of the Festival of DAM, and thank you all for being here. And thanks, Amanda. Have a good day.
Thank you guys so much. What a joy.